Hello, so I want to say a few things about this Twitter feud, Donald Trump's latest Twitter controversy. I say latest because it seems there's virtually not I was going to say a week, there's barely a day goes by when this president isn't generating controversy over something. Just the day before yesterday was his comment when he was honoring Navajo World War II veterans, the code breakers, and he had to throw in that jibe about Pocahontas. I really think Trump is a disastrous president in terms of how he communicates. I really think whether you're left wing or right wing, even even Trump supporters at this point would need to acknowledge that just for once this man should leave his ego out of it. Just for once, this man should consider doing diplomacy outside of Twitter. I mean, with Navajo codebreakers, for example, that was supposed to be their moment. They were the heroes. Now Trump praised them, but then he went on to just have a jibe at a political rival, and doing it in an insensitive way. So really, I think that goes without saying. Now, this controversy, I'm going to look at it from several different angles, and I suspect that I'm going to annoy the left and the right with the things I'm going to say here, but I just want to be honest as to how I see this. Firstly, a while back, one of my subscribers, on the video I made about Russia today, he said he supports RT for all the reasons that I don't. Now, he was respectful. I disagreed with what he was saying. He obviously disagreed with what I was saying. He was respectful about it, but I hope he sees this because I want to make it clear that I don't kowtow to any media network, and I think that they all have some real dirt that needs to be exposed. They all have sides which I deeply dislike. The BBC is no exception. Um, the way the BBC has handled this has been very, very biased as usual. It is a left wing organisation, and they've taken a very typically left wing angle on this. So basically, when they were reporting this, what had happened, if you don't know what I'm referring to here, Donald Trump had apparently retweeted some videos that had been posted by Britain First, which is a controversial neo nationalist group operating here in the UK. They pretend to be just against Islam, but I don't trust them. They are a far right organisation, and I want to be very clear about that. So, any Britain First supporters who come here thinking that I'm your ally, I'm not. I don't trust Britain First. I think they've got a track record of shit stirring, of distortion, and I really don't think they're particularly helpful in the fight against Islamism. Yes, they may say, point out some obvious things that Islamism is a threat and that there are problems going on, for example, with Pakistani grooming gangs, etc., etc. All those things must be discussed. And I've always said that when the mainstream don't discuss these things, then it does fall to fringe movements like Britain First. But I don't care much for Britain First, and yeah, they do have downright racist supporters. It's important I clarify this point because people say, oh, but they're just patriots defending their country. If you dig a bit beneath the surface, if you look at Britain First forums, they are a lot more than that. There is a darker side to this organisation. And anyone that slavishly kind of supports them without really doing their homework, this is an organisation made up of football hooligans and thugs, basically. They're idiots. They also post things that have been proven to be misleading and downright false at times. Now, about these three videos that they posted, there's been um, there's been some background done into those, and basically one of them depicted a teenage boy being beaten up in the Netherlands, purportedly by a Muslim immigrant. Now, it turns out that they were actually two Dutch boys, and the boy who was carrying out the assault was arrested and sent to juvenile detention. So they were both Dutch born boys. So that's a distortion. Um, the second one showed a Muslim cleric vandalizing a statue of the Virgin Mary in Syria a few years ago. Now, apparently, he was an ISIS supporter and a hardline Islamist. Doesn't mean he's not Muslim, so they're not technically wrong about that, but they didn't provide any context It's just Muslim destroys Virgin Mary. So in that sense, it is inflammatory, and I'll come back to that point in a second. Now, the third video shows apparently a teenage boy being thrown off a building in Alexandria, and people waving black flags were at the scene. Apparently, this had actually happened during the unrest in Egypt, following the pose following Mohammed Morsi being deposed. It was clashes between Egyptian political factions. Certainly, there was an Islamist element there, no question about it. But I think this was more a political fight rather than a sectarian fight. It may well have had that aspect as well. Regardless, once again, Britain First didn't bother to provide any context whatsoever. That is a problem, and that is something they should be criticised for. They never bothered to provide context. And as an organisation, they are pretty thick. Let's face it, they are pretty thick. They will say Muslim this, Muslim that. Now, I'm no regressive. Islam should be criticised. Islam should be scrutinised and exposed for all the ugly aspects within it. Absolutely. But Britain First is not particularly helpful to the situation. Now, why is it a problem for Trump to promote this? Well, it could be argued that he's interfering in domestic British politics by doing this. I mean, think if Theresa May, I don't know, posted something that had been written by Hillary Clinton or one of Donald Trump's Democratic opponents. The Trump White House would be furious about it. So I do think there is a pompousness here from President Trump. He says that May isn't doing anything about terrorism. Whether that's true or not, you could make the same argument. Trump hasn't done a damn thing about gun violence, despite two of the worst massacres in American history occurring this year. The reality is both countries have problems. We do have a problem with Islamist terrorism, but America does have a real problem with gun violence, something Trump has absolutely done nothing about because he wants to kowtow to the National Rifle Association. Now, back to the point about the BBC. Like I said, this video would irritate both the right and the left. I've probably irritated the right by criticising Britain First. I don't care. Britain First is a deeply problematic organisation. However, I do not believe that they're an existential threat. I believe they're idiots. Um, Definitely, there is aspects of racism in their midst, no question about it. And anyone that can't see that is very naive. Um, but the BBC, it's a big, powerful organization, far, far, far more powerful than Britain First. Now, when they were covering this, they said there was outrage in the responses. Now, what they done was they quoted three left wingers. They quoted Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. They quoted David Lammy, a left wing Labour MP, and Brendan Cox, a left wing activist. Okay, uh, that's hardly balanced. Then they had Chris Bryant, another left wing Labour MP, to say he felt Trump should be stopped from travelling to Britain. Um, no balance whatsoever. You had four responses, not a single one of them a Trump supporter, not a single one of them. For example, why not interview someone who has suffered from the endemic persecution that goes on in Islamic countries? It may well be that these Britain First videos were distorted, and it may well be, well, it is the fact that they didn't provide any context. But but there is a very important issue at play here, and that is that when it comes to discussing religious extremism, the BBC is cowardly, quite frankly. They will report it on BBC World News. They'll report things like the blasphemy outrage in Pakistan, where you had these protests demanding the resignation of a minister. They will report things like that, but they'll always report it just from, an observing point of view, like we're reporting this as news. But when it comes to this is the thing that bugs me. There's outrage over Trump retweeting these things, right? Now, I don't think he should have done it, and I think that's a problem. I do think it's a problem. But what I take issue with is the double standards. When is the people showing outrage at Trump going to show the same standards in the face of Islamic theocracies that really do persecute minorities? Forget Britain First. Look, Britain First, as far as I'm concerned, they're a distraction in all of this. And Trump, we all know that he conducts diplomacy through Twitter, which is a problem. But The BBC is gutless, absolutely shamefully spineless when it comes to discussing issues of religious extremism. They just won't do it. Or at least when they do it in the context of let's, walk on eggshells. Let's be very careful here how we say this. Now, they might say we've got reporters on the ground, so we need to be careful in that regard. But that doesn't take away the responsibility to say what is going on, the responsibility to say that there is religious extremism out there. They're particularly scared around Islamic extremism, but it isn't unique to Islam. I mean, if we look at Hindu extremism around this Bollywood film, again, they're tiptoeing around that issue. Call it what it is, Hindu extremism. I despise it's something that makes my blood boil that in democratic countries where there is freedom of expression, people tiptoe around these issues. It makes my blood boil. And if nothing else, what Trump is doing is opening up debate about that. Now, most people see Trump as a bit of a buffoon. Maybe he is, but that doesn't take away the fact that there is a very serious problem in the West, in my opinion, that we simply will not discuss these things, or when we do, we tiptoe around them. The regressive left, it's very, very easy for them to attack Trump and Britain first. Trump, he's a figure of fun. He's widely seen as a buffoon. Um, Britain First is a fringe, rather nasty fringe party, but they really are not that powerful. I don't think they're registered as a political party. Yes, they have support, and I'm not for a second downplaying the potential for violence from neo-nationalist groups. But is it an existential threat in the same way? I don't think it is, in the same way as pan-Islamism. You could argue that some of these far right groups are getting endorsements from Russia, in which case it does become existential. And I would implore anyone to be careful before backing the likes of Britain First. But like I say, do I think they are posing as great a threat to national security as pan Islamism? Absolutely not. I also believe that this is inevitable. When the mainstream won't talk about taboo subjects, then it will fall into the hands of the fringe groups. That's what happens. So Theresa May and all the other mainstream politicians have only themselves to blame for refusing to candidly, plainly call a spade, say there is a problem with Islamic extremism. Um, and this is not just an issue of terrorism, it's an issue of endemic persecution in Islamic countries. And this is something May should be absolutely pushing when she is making state visits to these countries. Now, the governments of those countries will say, oh, but we're arresting people who do this. I think they've got an uphill struggle. I think there is an inherent cultural problem going on here that's simply wherever you have an Islamic majority, there is intolerance. There is persecution of minorities. There is not a single example anywhere where there is an Islamic majority and you don't have persecution of minorities, endemic persecution. Contrast that with the West, where yes, you get hate crimes against individual Muslims, which I robustly and unreservedly condemn. But the point is, those are pursued and punished. Um, in Pakistan, for example, when that young student was beaten to death by an enraged mob, and they were not ISIS, these were other students. They weren't ISIS fighters, they were other students, beat him to death over an alleged blasphemy. There was condemnation. There was maybe a few hundred people turned up at his funeral. But here's the thing, when Islamist killers in Pakistan get executed, thousands and thousands of people turn up to their funerals. So I'm using Pakistan as an example. It's one of the worst examples, but it is an example. Even in more supposedly moderate Muslim countries like Indonesia, you are seeing a creeping theocratic trend. This is deeply concerning. So, to summarize, Trump shouldn't have posted that. I think that was a very pompous and undiplomatic thing to do. As for whether a strip should go ahead or not, quite honestly, I don't know. I think if we're going to invite the Saudi representatives, then we should definitely invite Trump. But um, as for Britain First, too, again, they won't give context to anything, and they do attack all Muslims as one and the same. That doesn't help anyone. But the bias of the BBC is frankly disgusting. Because they're a powerful organization, I call that abuse of power. What they should have done, by all means, interview left wing critics, but interview a few Trump supporters as well, or at least people who say, well, actually, there is a problem with persecution in Islamic countries. Forget the Britain First tweets, but there is a problem going on here. Now, is it right what Trump is saying that we need to do more about Islamic terrorism, for example? So those are a few things to think about. Um, and I think the BBC's bias is a disgrace because, like I said, they're in a position of power, far, far, far more powerful than Britain First. I really think Britain First is a distraction in all of this. Um, but those are the issues. So let me know your thoughts. One last thing I will say about Trump, though. We also shouldn't give Trump too much praise about, just telling it like it is. Trump kowtows to the Saudi regime like every American and British leader does. And the Saudi regime is one of the very worst Islamic theocracies. It's a country where atheists are seen as terrorists. So Trump shouldn't get too much praise for telling it like it is, because he is also kowtowed to Islamic theocracies. So those are some talking points to go on. Thanks for watching.